So I work for the National Youth Employment Coalition, and we essentially have a pot of money that is distributed to 10 community-based programs across the country. And what those funds do essentially is help programs establish both bridge programming at their organization or at their partner community college. And the second thing that we do is we also provide transition counseling support for students in their first year of school and then sometimes beyond. But the primary bulk of our work is about how they established a partnership with a community college partner and then how they deliver the bridge programming as well as the transition counseling support service to our students. So that's the first part. And then the second part is how does it relate to completion is essentially our goal is to help students really in that first year focus on their academic work and build all of the necessary skills that they need to be successful, particularly academic, but with those social supports as well so that they can ultimately complete college. So the social supports essentially that we find that our students need include housing, transportation, money for books. A lot of our funds get used for scholarship money for students to attend school. Childcare is often a really kind of big expense for a lot of our students. Some of our students need help with healthcare as well. So kind of the broader components of life is essentially where a lot of our support goes. That was the first part of your question. And then I think the second part of your question was about
where is their impact or what effectiveness or how is that measured right now?
One of the ways that we measured is definitely this idea of completion. So the kind of key areas that we focus on are access. So in setting up kind of the help that we were going to give to programs, we asked them to say, how many students do you think you're going to be able to help? And then we look at, so how many students did you actually help, meaning specifically access. So how many students were able to gain access to post-secondary institutions as a result of this help? How many of those students completed bridge programming? How many of those students entered into classes? And we look at both the credit bearing and the non-credit bearing. So looking at and we track the remediation classes that our students take as well as credit bearing classes that they take. And then we also keep track of and how long does that process take? How often or how much time are our students spending in remediation classes, for example, is a piece of what we look at. And for, I guess, our high-performing sites, how much work was done with them, that kind of pre-academic work to really give them those solid skills so that they either spent less time not in remediation classes or they're just kind of able to really get through in a strong way that first year of school.
What else would you like to see nationally to put more attention around real student needs and a student-centric experience at college?
So, I hear this a lot here. Like, it's interesting. One of the things about being at this conference is I heard the language used on more than one occasion here about how we all know these things, but the broader community doesn't really know or talk about these things. And I think for me, kind of one of the biggest things that I'd love to see the language change around is how we think of students. Because the kind of language that we use here or in this circle of the post-secondary world is the non-traditional student. But I think that kind of more broadly, people still think of students in a very traditional way. And I'd really kind of like to see that lexicon or that dialogue change around how we think of our college students. And so that it doesn't seem like this is such a special or such a different initiative versus we're really kind of supporting the mainstream student, and not having it be this idea necessarily that these students are on the margin, particularly if, we see that for the most part what we thought of as traditional has really changed and that has become more of the mainstream. So I just would like to kind of, just in a very broad way, having people understand the differences of how our students have changed and really kind of thinking of that as, not something that's necessarily on the margins.
That's a really important point. There's maybe two pieces. One is that there could be, the research shows that most students need remediation when they show up community college.
Right.
Almost 30% have their own children. Many are working already. So how else could we communicate this out, do you think?
That's a good question. It's actually one of the ones that we've been focusing on as an organization is like where are our advocacy efforts going to be, right? And how can we build political will? around this? I think, well, of course, there's always kind of the policy. One of our biggest focuses, particularly being in DC, is how we connect with legislators, how we share and disseminate this information. One of the projects that I'm beginning to work on is writing about these topics in kind of a very explicit way, but then inviting legislators to come and talk about this, both our community-based programs that are doing the work and then legislators in DC to hear them talk about this work. And so then using that as another kind of way to move these conversations from the margin to the center. And then I guess if there's anything else you come up with in your work and your research that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear about it. But right now we're really trying to build advocacy and particularly kind of bring that message to the more mainstream through political activism, essentially.
Well, continuing the bottom-up effort, we'd love to see students being champions themselves and speaking out. Have you seen that there's potential for that?
I definitely think so. I think part of our partnership, we work with programs that, well, they're all very, youth and student focused, but they definitely are building that kind of civic engagement, those leadership skills, that community activism. That is definitely a part of this work. And then to your point as well, one of the pieces that I really personally find both interesting and rewarding about this work is when I have the opportunity to talk to students, they talk about their own internal transformation, right? And so the idea that prior to this program, participating in this program, they may not have thought of themselves as a learner and certainly not as an academic scholar. And so hearing them talk about their own transformation versus, having adults say, oh, I really believe in you or you can really do this, but having students, and particularly, students who are parents, students who have dropped out of school, previously been disengaged for whatever reasons, students who have been incarcerated, but really begin to embrace their identity as an academic learner and really see that completion goal as something that's truly attainable. And I even hear students talk about, because so now I'm talking to my kids about school, this wasn't necessarily a conversation I had in my home growing up, but seeing that transformation absolutely I think is both really a part of this work, but it's certainly one of my favorite kind of pieces to just witness and experience.
It's an inspiring place to be when you see that there's a cultural change when someone can make that leap from disadvantage to taking charge of their lives, changing their paths.
That's right.
What would it look like if policymakers felt as passionately about this as you did?
Wow. I think that, one of the biggest pieces that we work on is truly having our institutions be more focused on the developmental needs. And I don't just even mean youth development, but kind of the human development needs of our students. I think that traditionally, at least I work with community colleges, they sometimes are just really maybe focused on the academic gains of students versus the reason why our partnership is from the CBO side is that idea that they're really kind of looking at the whole person, they're looking at the whole needs. And so I think if policymakers could kind of champion that effort, that kind of human development lens to thinking about education and kind of the broader supports that humans need when they are going through these kind of transformations that we just discussed, then I think that would be a really good thing to see. Yeah. Well, one of the things, to your point about student leadership, that we are specifically working on is how to not just incorporate the student voice, but to really have them own pieces of this work, right? And so I think I shared with you in a previous conversation how I spend so much time getting ideas from them and trying to find out from them where they want this work to go, what do they see for their future. And so I think in as much as we really, really connect that voice, and I want to essentially say have them own the revolution, so to speak, right? But certainly kind of the champions of the revolution, then I think that would be a really important next step in this kind of the post-secondary completion initiative.
Well, it's great to hear and learned a lot, and thank you so much for your work.
Thank you also for the opportunity today.